At the foot of the blood-stained throne, Ichimaru-gin smirked and commented with a strange look. Brother, the soul of his Zanpakuto is the Quincy King? How cool is that? Most people wouldn't even dream of it. Even if you couldn't think of a better name for a second, something like all-knowing, all-powerful would have done. Zangetsu. Aizen, slouched on the throne as always, showed an expression of unmistakable disappointment. Getsu? He said flatly. What does that have to do with the Quincy King? Ewok. He doesn't strike me as the sort who would hate the moon, Aizen thought. He couldn't make sense of Ichigo's Zanpakuto at all. Despite having peeled back so many of the world's secrets, this was the first time he'd run into something so strange. What frustrated him most was the implication. If Kurosaki Ichigo's Zanpakuto really was Ewok, then how do you explain the final battle that got interrupted? Didn't it basically end up with Ewok cutting himself when Ichigo showed up? What on earth is going on? It was absurd. On the screen, Ichigo's future self stood in a flood of spiritual pressure. Calmly, he turned his back to the camera, gripped the hilt of his sword, and prepared to draw his true Zanpakuto. Urahara Kisuke broke the silence. Speaking of which, I think that in all the previous footage, whenever Ichigo showed up, the thing he held was, Ishin supplied, a long, narrow black Zanpakuto in its Bankai form. Urahara rubbed the back of his head, uncertain. The reviews kept playing one after another. The footage was relentless. Before the viewers could even digest one revelation, another would pop up. Under such rapid replay, even someone sharp as Urahara found the details getting fuzzy. You remember correctly, his Bankai is that long, thin black blade. Ishin nodded, pride softening his features at the memory. The first time he'd seen his son appear in Byakuya Kuchiki's review, brandishing Tensa Zangetsu, he'd been elated. The all-black Tensa Zangetsu, sleek, light, and imposing, looked like a weapon with endless potential. Then we've never actually seen his Zanpakuto's Shikai state, have we? Ishin said suddenly. Exactly, Urahara said, an eyebrow lifting in anticipation. Every time Ichigo appeared in the footage, his sword was in Bankai. And since he grows to Soul King level power later, he continued under his hat, eyes gleaming. Presumably his Shikai would be special too, right? Yoruichi agreed. If the Bankai is that powerful, Zangetsu's Shikai must be noteworthy as well. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense for the sword spirit to be the Quincy King. Listening to the adults' debate, the present Ichigo's excitement built. He clenched his fists, eyes bright. Yeah, it's been so long, and I really have never seen my Zanpakuto's Shikai. This is a rare chance. He knew from all the battles he'd watched that Shikai gets phased out as the fights escalate. Bankai dominates in the later stages. During the 1,000-year Blood War, some Shinigami's Bankai were little more than minor tricks. Shikai rarely got its time in the sun. Seeing Ichigo's Shikai now, at the start of his journey, could be a unique opportunity. The anticipation buzzed through him. But only a few seconds later, when his future self coolly turned and began to draw the Zanpakuto, Ichigo's expression shifted. Expectation, stunned disbelief, blankness, then pure disappointment. In under a minute, his face went through more emotions than a stage actor, and every one of them was genuine. Holy crap, Ichigo shouted. No way, my Zanpakuto is actually a butcher's cleaver? On the screen, his future self, Black Shiakusho whipping in the spiritual storm, casually pulled out a massive blade. It wasn't a sword in any ordinary sense. The hilt's end was wrapped in a long white strip of cloth, common enough for Zanpakuto. Many had tassels, chains, or wrappings. But the blade itself was a gigantic, cleaver-like slab of metal, built for butchering pigs rather than dueling with finesse. It was ludicrous. Is there some mistake? Ichigo demanded, stunned. When it's Bankai, it's a thin blade. How does it become a butcher knife in Shikai? Is there really a connection between the two? Around him in the shop, others reacted the same way. Close friends and family, people who'd seen the power of captains, gaped at the screen. Eyes went wide in collective disbelief. What is that thing? Is that really a Zanpakuto? Why is it so huge? Ichigo felt queasy. I can't. He slumped, overwhelmed, nearly fainting. Another beautiful expectation, shattered. Fighting while lugging around that gargantuan cleaver? He'd be winded after 2 steps. It felt like a prank on his sense of honor. Seeing his son in that state, Ishin's face mixed sympathy and real concern for his mental well-being. Ishin patted Ichigo on the shoulder, trying to sound reassuring. Ichigo, if anything is bothering you mentally, don't be ashamed to say so. Don't bottle it up. Ichigo frowned. Dad, what are you talking about? I'm already depressed enough. Great, now he's going to kick me while I'm down. He shot his father a confused look. Ishin spread his hands and tried to explain, half exasperated, half embarrassed. Our family's a clinic, not a butcher shop. Ichigo blinked. What does that have to do with anything? Ishin jabbed a finger in the air. Your Zanpakuto, after it woke up, you say it turned into a pig-slaughtering knife, he continued, voice rising with theatrical horror. And if you're mentally stable, how do you end up with a terrifying blade spirit like Iwatch? Ichigo, how dark is your heart, really? Ichigo could only stare. If the video hadn't shown it, Ishin would never have known. He had thought his son was a model of integrity. Instead, surprises kept piling up. Dad, who am I supposed to ask about that? Ichigo muttered. Other Zanpa Kyoranmaru, Ryujinjaka, Kyoka Suigetsu were eccentric in their own ways but fit the patterns. His own? The blade spirit was Yiwatch, and the Shikai was bizarre beyond belief. It had nothing to do with his sanity. He was perfectly sane, truly. The footage on the screen froze at the moment Ichigo had raised Zangetsu, then snapped forward. The image shifted to a completely different scene. Oh, Urahara Kisuke murmured, this is inside the Seirete, a narrow corridor in the Gote 13 barracks. Rows of stone walls and dark eaves filled the frame. It must be that so-called Ryoka incursion, Urahara concluded. Clearly, whatever special training the future Ichigo had done in the basement had been followed by a trip to Soul Society. Ishin frowned. But if they stormed the Seirete like that, wouldn't the Gote 13 have surrounded and killed them on the spot? He'd left Soul Society nearly 20 years ago, but the rigid hierarchy and deadly rules were still vivid in his memory. Anyone who invaded without permission was shot on sight. Almost as if to answer him, the video swung the camera and focused on a figure collapsed in a pool of blood nearby. Ichigo. He was grievously wounded. His Shinigami robe was slashed to tatters, his entire body soaked in blood. Zangetsu, newly awakened in the earlier clip, was broken in two. Ichigo clutched the hilt. Though his breath came ragged and shallow, he kept trying to crawl out of the blood, eyes fierce and determined. He wasn't giving up. Then he coughed a mouthful of blood that stained his skin below the neck. The color of death spread quickly. The room's atmosphere dropped from curious excitement to grim silence. Who did this? Who nearly killed Ichigo? Urahara's eyes narrowed. The wounds suggested a single, powerful swordsman who favored slashes. Someone had clearly defeated Ichigo, but hadn't delivered the killing blow, left him there to bleed out. Urahara's mind leapt to one person. Could it be Zaraki Kenpachi? The camera panned to a figure turning away from the battlefield. The white captain's Haori bore a single, unmistakable number, 11. From deep in the first division, Kenpachi raised an eyebrow, amused. Almost choked the second-ranked fighter in the cradle too early? He grinned. What an unexpected highlight. Before the footage played on, Ichigo had still been just an ordinary high school student. He'd never lived through the later battles. He couldn't be expected to already have the outlook of the battle-hardened man in the recordings. At best, watching his own future might set his mindset in motion. Chapter 189. Do you even know how to use Zangetsu? The video did not spare the agony. Ichigo lay in a spreading pool of blood, coughing and gasping. Get up, he rasped to himself. I want to fight. I don't just want to live. I want to win. His eyelids fluttered as exhaustion dragged at him, but the fighting spirit in his eyes did not fade. With his wrist planted on the cold, blood-slick floor, he summoned what was left of his strength. He roared and staggered, holding the broken hilt of Zangetsu, desperate to rise and keep fighting. The camera recorded every raw, defiant movement from an unblinking vantage point. The scene ignited heated debate across the Soul Reaper world. Kenpachi, someone muttered. You overdid it. Ichigo's bleeding out. He won't last long. He's supposed to be one of the saviors in that final battle, another voice protested. Nemu Kurotsuchi's eyes flicked beneath her mask. Behind the smile, there was a chill. Whether pity or sarcasm, no one could tell. What, you have an opinion? Kenpachi snorted, shouldering his chipped Zanpakuto as if it were nothing. Fighting without holding back, that's the straightforward way. Better than stabbing a comrade in the back like some people do. Kenpachi's words stung. He still remembered the deliberate stab he'd taken from Nemu during the fight with the Spirit King's left hand. Nemu only stroked her chin, changing the subject. If he can survive wounds like this, then that would be something. The narrow passage was empty. No allies, no healers, no medics to patch him up. By all logical accounts, Ichigo should have bled out right there. And yet he kept crawling forward. Because if he stopped now, how could he ever stand to fight Kuchiki Byakuya later on Sokyoku Hill? The thought of giving up was not an option. Could it be instant resurrection? That was preposterous. Nemu Kurotsuchi's words echoed the doubts of every captain in the room. The camera had cut to a close-up, and it had been from Ichigo Kurosaki's point of view, right as Kenpachi Zaraki was leaving the field. There was no way the audience could be shown the moment of someone's death as if they had personally experienced it. The only reasonable explanation was that Ichigo had seen something. "You're saying?" Isane Kotetsu, vice captain to Retsu Nohana, whispered, gathering courage. "Is there a chance that when Ichigo was on the verge of death, Yuak came to save him?" The suggestion hung in the air and made the room go still. As if on cue, the captains' minds went back to the end of the previous feed, that split second before the recording ended. Ichigo had leapt out of a Garganta fissure behind Soul King Yuak and swung his Zanpakuto with everything he had. How could the spirit of a Zanpakuto be the Yuach from 1,000 years ago? Before anyone could fully sort that out, the footage continued. Just as Kenpachi was leaving the battlefield, a muffled boom and the previously vivid image went abruptly black. The captains instinctively leaned forward. When the picture returned, something bizarre had appeared beside Kenpachi, a blood-red cloak, vivid and dark against the gloom. Yuach, wrapped in that cloak, brushed past Zaraki and strode straight toward the camera, toward the place where Ichigo had fallen. A swelling dramatic score rose with the image. The oppressive, lifeless scene was suddenly transformed. What had felt hopeless now thrummed with a dangerous kind of hope. The captains were stunned into silence. Yuach stopped in front of the camera, hands tucked behind his back, cloak billowing. Then, calmly, he spoke. "Ichigo, do you want to fight? Do you want to win?" The red cloak unfurled like a summons and reached toward Ichigo. The sight felt less like Yuach rescuing a pawn and more like an ally calling a comrade to stand beside him. The implication was so alien to everything they knew about Yuach that even the most rigid among the captains were speechless. Yuach, who had used the Oswalin to exterminate and absorb his followers across the war, who treated even Haschwalth as a tool, to actually invite someone to fight alongside him was unthinkable. Then Ichigo's eyes, at first blank with death, flared with resolve. His broken body seemed to fill with power in an instant. He roared, "Just fighting isn't enough. Surviving is meaningless if it doesn't lead to victory. I will win this battle." The red cloak swallowed him. For a heartbeat, the feed focused on that engulfing fabric, and then the screen snapped back to the Soul Society. The tilted skyscrapers, the empty, eerie streets. But the silence there was broken by a sharp, violent voice that cut through the air. "Ha, Ichigo, you good-for-nothing. Do you even know how to use Zangetsu?" The sound was like a physical gust, and it made everyone in the command center flinch. Shunsui Kyoraku's face tightened. That voice, it rang a bell. He remembered the hollow white from Aizen's inventory, the monstrous thing that had howled through its battle against Shiba Ishin. Back then, it had only roared. It had never spoken. Now it was speaking fluent words. If Hollow White had advanced like this over the last 20 years, Shunsui felt a coldness creep down his spine. Hollow White had never been a normal hollow. It had been composed of hundreds of dead Shinigami souls, a unique Menos Grande that straddled the line between Shinigami and Menos race. Even in its primitive, bestial form, it had fought at captain-level strength. If it had evolved beyond mere roaring and learned to taunt in human speech, the implications were terrifying. The captains watched the feed in stunned silence, the earlier hope curdling into a new, chilling uncertainty. Then, after 20 years of dormancy, how much stronger would it be? The thought alone made Shunsui Kyoraku's expression fall. In an instant, he realized just how serious this was. He wasn't the only one. Almost every Shinigami captain in the room felt the same chill, especially when that razor-sharp sound wave from the recording washed over them. The noise sliced through the air and through their bodies. Hairs rose, skin prickled, and every captain's hand went unconsciously to the hilt at his waist. They assumed battle stances as though facing a genuine threat, and all because of a sound that, at the moment, had shown no hostile intent. It only underscored how wary captain-ranked Shinigami were, deep down. And then, as the camera slowly panned, Hollow White finally revealed its true form. The reaction across the Soul Society was immediate and violent. How is this possible? Gasps echoed, ricocheting throughout the Seirete. Through the lens, facing Ichigo Kurosaki, stood another figure, entirely white, identical to Ichigo in appearance, the body made of pure white and the eyes a deathly, otherworldly yellow like a Menos Grande. The sight left everyone incredulous. Even the most composed swallowed audibly. The captains all looked suddenly and thoroughly unnerved. Moisture seemed to leave their throats at once. It's absurd. Retsu Unohana, who had once danced through corpses with a blade, showed a crack in her serene composure. Even through a screen, she could feel the murderous aura radiating from Shiro Ichigo, an aura more terrifying than even her Yachiru-style killing intent. The perfect replication of the Soul Space owner's form, the naturalness of the presence, the sheer murderous power, none of it matched an ordinary hollow. That bastard Aizen, Toshiro Hitsugaya hissed, jaw tight, sweat beading on his brow. Hitsugaya's spiritual strength was still that of a young man and far less than veterans like Unohana, but even he could tell something was off. His voice trembled as he accused Aizen. What kind of monster did he make? Heh! Came a dark chuckle. A Menos Grande beyond normal comprehension. A Quincy King from 1,000 years ago. Nemu Kurotsuchi's tone held strange excitement. No wonder Ichigo Kurosaki became so powerful later on, she said. With these two standing side by side in his soul space, he was never going to be an ordinary Shinigami. She had a point. If a soul contained both Shiro Ichigo and the Quincy King, the host was being driven by forces that wouldn't allow slacking, an innate power that pushed its wielder onward. It was a kind of divine favor, a cheat even greater than the Hogyoku. On the screen, Ichigo, the real Ichigo, stared at the projection of Shiro Ichigo and was briefly stunned. But he was no longer the naive novice who had trained in a basement years ago. After a moment, he pulled himself together. Under Yuok's test, the Ichigo in the recording fought Shiro Ichigo, who wielded Zangetsu with casual, unrestrained expertise. The way Shiro Ichigo handled Zangetsu was revelatory. It opened everyone's eyes. So strong. Ichigo's father, Isshin, watched with bright eyes. We underestimated this pig-slaughtering blade. Ichigo clenched his fist beside him, silent but entirely attentive, soaking in Shiro Ichigo's movements. For reasons neither he nor anyone could fully explain, watching the footage felt like gaining experience and insight from another timeline. Though his life path had diverged and he had not lived through those battles, the knowledge and combat intuition seemed to transfer just by observation. It was as if he could absorb the original World Line's lessons and grow stronger. On screen, Shiro Ichigo sneered. Ha, Ichigo, you're pathetic. With a blade like this, how could you end up covered in blood? At the general store, Kisuke Urahara's brow knit. He broke in, almost involuntarily. Strange. It's just a hollow, the antithesis of Shinigami and Zanpakuto. But how is it that when Hollow White praised Zangetsu, it sounded like he was praising himself? Chapter 191. Is this the legendary Vasto Lord? The shock rolled farther than the Seirete. In Las Noches, even with Aizen present and watching, the Arankar below the throne shifted in their seats as they took in Hollow White's arrogance. They felt an instinctive wariness toward this fellow in the recording. Ch! Grimjo's jaw clenched. Hollow White's insolent visage stirred a sharp, nameless anger. He thought back to the arrest operation in the human world and the chance he'd missed. If I'd been luckier back then, Kurosaki Ichigo might be dead already, he muttered, displeased at Hollow White stealing the spotlight. He glanced at his scarred abdomen and felt an old ache flare. Neutra, someone jeered, and Neutra didn't miss the chance to needle Grimjo. You sound sour, jealous of Hollow White's evolution and strength, aren't you? He grinned. Grimjo shot him a murderous look. What of it? Neutra ignored the glare and focused on what they were seeing. It's replicated a human body perfectly, he said coldly. It fights with power comparable to a Shinigami captain, and now Now it's handling a Zanpakuto like one of us. He rose in voice, the words drawing attention. All the elements are here. It integrates the traits of both Shinigami and Menos Grande. If that's true, then it's something even more powerful than a Vasto Lord. The statement sent another ripple through the gathered Arankar. Across the worlds, captains and Hollow alike felt a new, unsettling possibility taking shape. Whatever Hollow White was, it defied simple classification, and it might be far deadlier than anything they'd faced before. Stronger than a Vasto Lord, that would make him the legendary Hollow King? In a corner of the chamber, Haribal's hand trembled. Her usually composed eyes were wide with shock. Hollow King was more legend than fact. Among Menos Grande, the highest known form was the Vasto Lord, yet the presence before them felt like something beyond even that. Even if a Hollow King did not truly exist, Haribal couldn't shake the conviction that White Ichigo was exactly that, the true king of Hollows, the most powerful being of them all. She was not alone. The other Espada sat in stunned silence. The oppressive force radiating from White Ichigo had transformed these once proud monsters, renowned for slaughter and savagery, into a docile, cowed flock. If Baragan were alive today, he would undoubtedly wonder whether his old title of Hollow King should be ceded to this newcomer. Near the throne, Aizen and his small circle, those who had fashioned Hollow White and orchestrated the events behind the scenes, watched with a mixture of fascination and alarm. Tosin Kaname's voice trembled with excitement. Though blind, his spiritual pressure sense told him everything he needed to know. Relief, almost maternal, washed over him at the power he perceived. Aizen-sama, Tosin said, it seems our unintended creation has become something unprecedented. A truly formidable Hollow King, added one of the others. Aizen's lips curved in the slightest of smiles as he acknowledged them. Then, with a change of tone, calm and confident, he cut in. Kaname, there's something I must correct you on. Tosin stiffened and bowed, wary of a rebuke. Aizen's gaze, inscrutable and sharp, fell on White Ichigo, and more importantly, on the Zanpakuto that lay in Ichigo's hand. Hollow White. That name and that form are hollow, yes, Aizen continued. But I can't shake the feeling that it is unusually compatible with the Zanpakuto. Captain Aizen, do you mean Hollow White and Zangetsu are one? Gin Ichimaru asked, curiosity and surprise lacing his voice. Aizen hesitated only a moment. I have that impression. It's an intuition more than proof. He frowned, weighing the evidence he'd already gathered. All signs pointed to the middle-aged man they'd seen earlier being only a facade, the true spirit of the Zanpakuto manifesting somehow. But the existence of the so-called walk in that scene still confounded him. Was it a fragment of a remnant soul? A spiritual will given shape? Aizen could not say with certainty. Ichigo's investigation into himself had only just begun. There wasn't enough information to confirm his hypothesis that Ichigo Kurosaki and Zangetsu were somehow fused with this white hollow entity. Abandoning the thread for now, Aizen refocused on the images playing on the screen. After a brutal struggle in the soul space, after White Ichigo's relentless onslaught and the lesson Ichigo had endured there, his perseverance finally paid off. As always, Ichigo Kurosaki refused to give up. He wrested Zangetsu back from White Ichigo's grip, the clash in soul space ending with Ichigo regaining control of his blade. The footage shifted abruptly back to the Seirete battlefield. Where the screen had been muted and gray, color flooded back in. No way, someone muttered. After he retook his sword in the soul space, the broken Zanpakuto in the real world got repaired? Omaeda clicked his tongue in disbelief. If that were true, it meant an instant resurrection of sorts, utterly abnormal. Just then, the camera panned. Zaraki Kenpachi, who had been leaving the field, sensed something and stopped mid-step, turning back in confusion. The viewpoint followed his gaze. What filled the screen made every viewer go rigid with incomprehension. Boom! A brilliant surge of bluish spiritual pressure erupted, whipping dust from the ground and evaporating every bloodstain in its wake. A triumphant, familiar drumbeat swelled in the soundtrack. Ichigo Kurosaki rose again, battered but resolute, his black Shinigami Shihakusho flapping in the pressure wind, Zangetsu resting across his shoulder. The captive audience could only stare. Some could not hold back exclamations. Good grief. It's like the sword is some kind of speaker that can revive him whenever the music plays. Every time the music starts, that's when he launches his counterattack. Kenpachi's in trouble. Inside the first division, the captains watched in stunned silence. Ichigo's recovery on the screen, his injuries melting away as he stood in that heroic pose, struck them as absurd, yet effective. They were prepared now. After the initial shock, they shared a sympathy for Zaraki Kenpachi. You had to admit it, Kenpachi was cursed. He'd been just beyond the camera's range, almost out of reach, and yet he still couldn't escape Ichigo's inexplicable cheat. Even the king of brute force found it hard to cope with the musical onslaught. Kenpachi himself, brash, simple, and eternally hungry for a fight, was not cowed. He cracked his joints until the bones in his arms and shoulders popped and grinned with feral excitement. "What are you looking at?" he snapped, irritation and pride mingling in his voice. "Don't forget, until now, I've been parading around with my head held high, dragging my sword on the ground like a victor. If I can cut him down once, I'll cut him down twice." He let out a short, disdainful snort and deliberately released his reiatsu. The tiny bells braided into his hair chimed as the pressure wind carried his aura outward. The sound sliced into the background music, lowering its volume slightly, and for a moment, Kenpachi finally reclaimed some space on the field. In the recorded audio, the future Kenpachi's voice, laced with curiosity, came through. "Oh?" Zaraki Kenpachi raised an eyebrow. A look of genuine surprise crossed his scarred face beneath the eye patch as he growled in a deep voice. "What the hell? The reiatsu that disappeared before, it's back, and his spiritual pressure, it's gotten exponentially stronger. Even, all his wounds have healed." Kenpachi's pupils contracted suddenly. The reaction reflected what every viewer watching the transmission was thinking. It's true. All the cuts on Kurosaki Ichigo's body healed in an instant under that surge of reiatsu. Behind Captain Retsu Unohana, Isane Kotetsu covered her mouth in shock, her face pale. That kind of supernatural healing speed, probably faster than even Unohana's top-tier Kido could track. It was overwhelmingly powerful, and that wasn't the worst of it. As Ichigo waved his arm, a column of reiatsu shot straight into the sky. In the very next instant, he vanished. Holy! Not only did his injuries heal, his physical power exploded. That Shunpo, it's insane! The Soul Reaper captains were stunned. In the blink of an eye, Ichigo's black silhouette reappeared like a ghost directly in front of Zaraki Kenpachi. Concealing himself from spiritual detection, he raised his Zanpakuto and brought it down in a devastating slash. Pfft! The sound of flesh tearing. A geyser of blood, more than 10 meters high, shot up and splattered over the camera, instantly tinting the screen crimson. Before anyone could recover, Ichigo went full throttle. Slashes came one after another, as if an endless well of power was pouring from him. Swish, swish, swish! After a barrage of strikes that carved through everything like cutting melons and vegetables, the once proud Zaraki Kenpachi had been turned into a walking smear of blood. His Shinigami uniform and captain's haori were soaked dark. Kenpachi did manage to parry. He forced his Zanpakuto against a wall to support himself and dragged his retreating body back, but the tide had turned. Severely wounded, he was now the one teetering on defeat. In contrast, Ichigo's eyes were steady. An otherworldly, flickering blue glow danced in his dark irises. He stood with unshakable resolve. Inside the first division, a deathly silence fell. The captains, fighting to keep their composure, simply couldn't hide their astonishment. Not a single face remained unchanged. Even Kenpachi himself was speechless on the spot. "No way. Against a Shikai Zanpakuto, I can't find the strength to parry," he bellowed, breathless. "Who is the king of basic attacks?" he snarled, half amused, half outraged. Kenpachi lived for battle and didn't care if his opponent cheated, so long as the fight thrilled him, but he did have his pride. "You come at me with nothing but raw, basic slashes. Do you have any shame?" he wanted to scream. He was both furious and helpless as he watched the situation slip away, forced to remove his eye patch. The footage of Kenpachi taking off his eye patch drove Neutra of Las Noches absolutely ballistic. "This is unreal," Neutra spat, crimson with humiliation. Just a Shikai Zanpakuto doing basic attacks, and it made Kenpachi take off his eye patch that easily? The memory of his own shame during Kenpachi's rank review, when Kenpachi had made him look weak, flared back. He'd hoped that long-ago embarrassment was past, But now Ichigo's desperate counterattack sliced not only Kenpachi's flesh but Noitra's old wounds as well. Yet that wasn't the worst of it. After a string of exchanges, both fighters finally let go, releasing all the Reiatsu contained in their bodies at once. The screen flooded with golden and blue light. Under everyone's watchful eyes, Ichigo and Kenpachi hurled themselves into one final desperate collision. Boom! The blast nearly overwhelmed the display. The narrow walkways of the outer court collapsed, stone and dust flying in all directions. When the camera finally cleared, the first thing viewers saw was Zaraki Kenpachi lying on his back, and his Zanpakuto snapped cleanly in two in his hand. Silence fell across the Soul Society. P.S. I'm sick. My head is dizzy and swollen, so I'm typing very slowly, sorry. Chapter 193. Cheat activated. White Ichigo takes over. He lost. Kenpachi Zaraki. He was defeated. Because the camera had been focused tightly on Kenpachi's fallen form, Ichigo's figure was outside the shot and his condition couldn't be judged. The audience's immediate conclusion was that Kenpachi had suffered a crushing defeat. Such a reversal. I didn't see that coming. Kyoraku Shinsui's expression was complex as the scene blurred and the feed ended. From lying in a pool of blood near death to standing up and unleashing a storm of continuous slashes that nearly toppled a sure victor, the whole sequence had taken only minutes, too quick for the mind to properly register. Captain Kenpachi. Komamura Sajin, who usually disliked Kenpachi, surprised everyone by stepping forward with genuine sympathy. You don't need to be ashamed. That wasn't because you weren't strong enough. Kurosaki Ichigo's power was just too overwhelming. In that situation, I think it would have been the same against anyone. Had everyone forgotten the scene in the Soul Space? Ichigo had the Vasto Lord on his left and the Quincy King on his right. Whatever he was now, it was terrifying, and the consequences of that power had just been written across the First Division for all to see. Even Ikaku Madarame tried to cheer him up. As a devoted follower of Kenpachi Zaraki, Ikaku was genuinely worried his captain would be crushed by the public humiliation. After all, every person in that room was a Soul Reaper captain. The whole of Soul Society had just seen that review footage. Nobody liked being humiliated in front of everyone. Kenpachi didn't take the comfort well. He snorted, baring his teeth in a grin that smelled of bloodlust. Don't pity me. I'm not that fragile. Then, in a low, dangerous voice, if Kurosaki Ichigo ever comes to Soul Society again, I'll personally challenge him. The abrupt promise surprised everyone. Kenpachi made no excuses and denied nothing. He simply tucked the defeat away and waited for another chance to get even. Yachiru poked her head out from Kenpachi's shoulder and giggled, the childlike laughter instantly easing the room's tension. The heated discussion died down and the matter was set aside. They had all seen the cheat-like Zanpakuto in Ichigo's hands and were shaken, but becoming a captain meant enduring hardship. All present could recognize Ichigo's resolve. His will had been the only thing keeping him standing, getting up a second time against all odds. That never-give-up spirit was rare and worth respecting. There was no time to dwell on it. The video screen blurred and dimmed, then snapped to another scene without fading to black. That's Senbonzakura Kageyoshi's sword array. Several voices breathed at once as the enormous pink array filled the screen. Two Zanpakuto wielders locked in battle at its center. It's that moment, the aftermath of his Bankai, from Captain Kuchiki's review round. It's the footage that got cut off earlier, Renji Abarai said, excited, eyes glued to the screen. Before he'd finished, Byakuya Kuchiki, beside him, turned with a cold, warning glare and pressed a finger to his lips. Renji faltered, then realized with a guilty start that Kurosaki Ichigo was the subject of the review. He ducked his head and scratched at the back of his neck, apologizing. Captain Kuchiki, sorry, I forgot for a second. Byakuya's snort was as frigid as ever. He withdrew his gaze but did not speak. Instead, he watched the lighted screen with a stiff, uneasy tension. He did not want to repeat Kenpachi's fate. The barbarian's disarray had been impossible to ignore. Rationally, Byakuya knew better than to hope. On the screen, Byakuya's voice spoke coldly. Kurosaki Ichigo, trapped within Senbonzakura, your speed is falling. Kuchiki's grip tightened. From the blade array behind him, a shower of cherry blossom blades congealed into a single shard. He sent it spinning with sudden force. In a flash of movement, It sank through Ichigo's foot, pinning him to the shattered earth and immobilizing him. Then Byakuya raised his hand and unleashed a streak of white lightning that ripped open a bloody hole in Ichigo's right shoulder. His methods were surgical and merciless, efficient, killing intention. Truly fitting of the cold noble among the captains, someone murmured. Watching Ichigo sway under the blows, the captains acknowledged Byakuya's ruthless decisiveness. Unlike Kenpachi's restraint, Byakuya's intent was to finish the fight. As Byakuya stepped forward with his Zanpakuto ready to deliver the final strike, Ichigo's voice, hoarse, desperate, cut through the footage. Move, 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 or I'll die. Ichigo's feral will to survive burst out. The captains watching felt that old stirring again, the infectious pull of raw determination. Every time, Ichigo's refusal to give up moved them. Only Byakuya's face darkened further. He felt a premonition, the same dread that had haunted him when Kenpachi was undone. Some kind of counterstrike might be coming. And then the scene pivoted with a single, violent voice, sharp, cold, full of contempt and a kind of dangerous affection. Shh, idiot, Ichigo. Didn't I tell you? If you die, I'll be in trouble too. The captain started. The voice carried a malign presence that pricked at the nerves of all who heard it. In an instant, the assembled officers reacted. That's Shiro Ichigo. Is it about to take over Kurosaki Ichigo's body? The voice, sharp, tyrannical, and laced with malice, changed the room's atmosphere. Even before any form appeared, the mere sound of it sent a wave of unease through their hearts. It felt rotten and invasive. It made them irritable and on edge. Shiro hadn't fully manifested, just a grin, and yet his presence inspired fear from the very depths of those who listened. The memory of what had happened in the squad office half an hour earlier replayed in everyone's minds. This time, all sympathetic eyes turned to Kuchiki Byakuya. It was sympathy doubled. They didn't pity him out of disdain, far from it. The look was simple concern and a quiet, doubled-up compassion for the man who now stood in the most precarious position of all. Chapter 195. Could he be one of our comrades? He had made it onto the rankings. His strength was beyond question. It was just a cruel bit of luck that he had run up against a monster-level opponent. Really bad luck. Feeling the strange, heavy gazes of his colleagues, Byakuya Kuchiki said nothing. His already severe, handsome face was swallowed by a pall of despair. If he could send a message through time, he would have shouted at his future self right then, "There's a cheat! Abort the mission! What are you waiting for? Retrieve your Zanpakuto and run!" But in the real world, no matter how unwilling he was, Byakuya could not change what was playing out on the screen. At the moment Senbonzakura's attack was about to land, the man who should have been frozen, Kurosaki Ichigo, did something impossible. Under dozens of astonished stares, Kurosaki Ichigo suddenly raised his left arm and, with his bare hand, blocked Senbonzakura's strike. The camera zoomed in, and everyone watching could see a white substance, only seen during holofication, condensing across the upper right side of Ichigo's face with visible speed. This is holofication. The pattern's the same as the Visorid's unconscious holofication we saw in those future files. The captains all exclaimed. They had seen Visorid holofication in clips before, yes, but never like this. The holo within him was operating on a different level. This was the first time the so-called Holo King was acting on its own. White Ichigo's sudden, wild transformation grabbed everyone's attention. Byakuya's voice, incredulous, rang out from the video. He stared, eyes wide. He was witnessing holofication up close. The arrogant calm that usually lived in his dark eyes crumbled into fear and unease. He tried to contain it and coldly demanded, "Who exactly are you?" "Who am I?" The figure on the screen replied. The camera followed him and captured the moment he looked up. He sneered. His voice was a knife. Worse, the white bone mask had nearly formed, mottled white with 3 red streaks, covering much of his face, radiating an aura of pure death. Yellow eyes gleamed from beneath the mask, like pits leading to oblivion. What a terrifying sight. Those yellow eyes under the mask, looking into them is like staring into an abyss. Your soul could be swallowed at any moment. The captain's breathing hitched. Even though the gaze was aimed at Byakuya, the camera angle made it feel as if it were directed at everyone watching. And all of them were pure Shinigami. Their instinctive hatred and revulsion for hollows sat in the core of their beings. That single, unblinking glance from White Ichigo triggered a primitive response. Instinctively, one after another, the captains released spiritual pressure, the most fundamental, involuntary defense of any living creature. Booms of pressure surged outward, cracking the ground and tearing at the structure around them. The roof fractured, and shards of the building exploded outward. The chamber where the captains had gathered was shredded by the backlash. Ukitake Jushiro, ever kind, called out over the chaos. "Captain Kuchiki, perhaps you should turn away for a moment. You don't have to watch this." Byakuya shook his head and refused, cold and proud. "No, there is no need. I refuse to look away because I am losing." He bore it with the brittle dignity of a nobleman, gritting his teeth and continuing to watch. There was a grim consolation. Zaraki Kenpachi was there, too. If worst came to worst, they would lose face together. But there was no time for speeches. On the screen, Ichigo, without hesitation, picked up his Zanpakuto, Tensa Zangetsu, and struck. A harsh, sinister laugh accompanied him as he slashed upward with ruthless force. The same suffocating BGM that had made the captain's hair stand on end echoed again. "It's happening again!" The music, it's activated the cheat. The captain's scalps prickled as Tensa Zangetsu tore into Byakuya. Where the dark blade passed, lines of blood bloomed. Heavy, hot sprays painted the air. In a matter of seconds, the whole fight flipped. Senbonzakura Kageyoshi, the massive blade formation that had once filled the screen and should have saved Byakuya, was instead the instrument of his undoing. The glittering formation only set off the crimson, turning the scene into a dazzling, gruesome tableau. Even worse were the words that came from the thing occupying Ichigo's body, cold, arrogant, and merciless. "You're only getting hit by Bankai spiritual pressure," he taunted. "Are the bones in your body already creaking with fear? Shinigami, you truly are worthless." Those barbs were meant to destroy spirit as surely as Tensa Zangetsu destroyed flesh. They stripped Byakuya of the last of his composure. He was being cut to pieces and humiliated at the same time. At a convenience store across town, a crowd watched the same feed. Gasps and cheers rose in waves, pumped by the pounding music. Excitement crackled through their veins. That was satisfying. Such brutal, unfair hacking. White Ichigo really is a hollow king-level being, Kisuke Urahara said, fanning himself lazily. What a show. Indeed. Ishin Kurosaki looked down at Byakuya on the screen, bloody, wounded, and then at the shattered Kenseiken hair ornament scraped into powder by a single stroke. A grin split Ishin's face as he watched. Chapter 196, Controlling Hollowification? Shiro Ichigo will resist, right? Kuchiki Byakuya, I've always found that brat insufferable. Today I finally get to see him suffer. Back when Kurosaki Ishin hadn't left the Seirei, the Shiba family's label as fallen nobles meant Byakuya Kuchiki barely acknowledged him. Every time Ishin tried to be polite, he was met with a frosty response. Only after Ishin became captain of the 10th Division did the two of them speak as equals. Who would have thought that now, this arrogant, impassive noble would be beaten black and blue by his own son, Ichigo? Of course, Ichigo's body in the video was temporarily occupied by Shiro Ichigo. A substitute was still a substitute, but who cared? As long as the crowd enjoyed the spectacle, that was enough. When I get back to the Soul Society, I'm going to taunt Byakuya mercilessly. Yoruichi grinned with pure schadenfreude. She had once been Byakuya's teacher, and their bond wasn't shallow, but she wasn't one for niceties. Like Kisuke Urahara, she loved a show, and she even felt Shiro Ichigo hadn't hit him hard enough. Byakuya had led a smooth, privileged life. This kind of crushing defeat was a rare, almost educational humiliation. Maybe it would finally knock a little humility into him and shake off that eternally cold poker face. A poker face deserved a good beating. None of them noticed, though, that the Ichigo watching the footage beside them had closed his eyes in reality the moment Shiro Ichigo took over in the recording. At the same time, a patch of white hollowification began to bloom on the upper right of his cheek, exactly where it appeared in the video. Influenced by watching, Ichigo had started to hollowify in sync. His spiritual power was weak, so although he could learn by watching, he still had to go through special training and be tempered before he could truly control such a force. Still, this was the first spark, the moment, after the world line changed, that Ichigo officially began his path toward becoming a Shinigami. Back in the video, Shiro Ichigo's wild onslaught had left Byakuya staggering. The captain's haori was soaked in blood, and his composed expression had broken. Byakuya ignored the pain just to keep his eyes forward, every muscle taut and unable to relax for an instant. Beneath the white hollow mask, Ichigo's mouth was twisted into a feral grin, almost mad with delight. With a brutal clang, Shiro Ichigo crushed the Sakabato's cherry blossom blade under his bare hand and spat. "Is that all you've got? What a fuss!" "Trash Shinigami," he sneered. "Open your eyes and watch the true power of Tensa Zangetsu Bankai." He laughed, a boundless, arrogant sound, as if lecturing a child. The crowd held their breath. Then, with a casual, effortless swing, his sword arm unfurled like a coiled spring. Dark, crimson spiritual pressure condensed into a crescent-shaped slash and hurtled toward Byakuya. "That's a red Getsuga Tensho," the veteran Soul Reapers cried in unison. They remembered Isshin's ultimate Getsuga from Aizen's trial, but that one had been blue. With Menos Grande-level spiritual pressure dominating here, the Getsuga had taken on a deep blood-red hue. It was an unprecedented, terrifying sight. No way to dodge it. Across the First Division, the captains' faces went pale. They hadn't expected a single casual strike from Shiro Ichigo to rival a captain's full-power attack. The red Getsuga struck within camera range like a flood of forged steel, sweeping everything in its path and raising a choking wall of smoke. Byakuya was swallowed up in the onslaught. For a moment, his fate hung in the balance. How terrifying! In 2 straight fights, the captains are failing faster and faster. At least Zaraki Kenpachi lasted a while. That poker-faced Byakuya didn't even make it 3 minutes. How powerful is the hollow inside Kurosaki Ichigo? In the human world, inside an abandoned warehouse, the visored gathered around a transparent screen, riveted by the onslaught. Though they had cleared their names after Aizen's exposure and no longer openly opposed the Gotei 13, a century of grievances didn't vanish overnight. Seeing the Gotei suffer was a rare delight, especially since the Vizorid had often been sidelined or beaten when they'd appeared before. They were still eager to drag more people down with them. Hirako Shinji, no longer stunned, leaned back and thought aloud. If the hollow inside Kurosaki Ichigo is that strong, he must be troubled by it, right? Since he's in Karakura Town, maybe he'll come to us to learn how to control hollowification. Hirako had a strong premonition. Kurosaki Ichigo's hollow-feed form felt oddly familiar to him. He was sure this stubborn kid, who kept pushing back against the odds, would one day form a bond with them. "You think Kurosaki Ichigo will become one of us?" "Hirako, have you lost your mind?" Hiyori Sarugaki snapped, arms crossed and face sour. "Just because he's hollow-fied you feel close to him? He has nothing to do with us." She glared and bristled, flip-flop in hand, ready to strike. They had almost met before. The Vizorid had sensed the Espada during the Arrancar invasion and tried to intervene, but by the time they reached the high school campus, Anti-Escudo had already fallen, Grimjo had fled, and Ichigo had been taken away by his friends and family. The 2 groups had merely brushed past each other. The review video kept playing on in fast-forward, the next scene already beginning to unfold. Chapter 197, Why Did You Provoke Him? What the heck? Everyone in the viewing hall was glued to their seats. There was no chance for casual introductions or small talk now. This was spectacle, pure and simple. Hiyori Sarugaki found the whole idea ridiculous. Ichigo Kurosaki was doing just fine on his own. He already had powerful allies surrounding him. Why would he come to us? Even if someone were shameless enough to want to bask in the reflected glory of the world's second-ranked fighter, they should at least be realistic. Hirako Shinji glanced around. Seeing his comrade's dismissive expressions, he shrugged helplessly. "Forget I said anything. Just a spur-of-the-moment thought." "But Hiyori's right," another voice said. "After what happened in the 1,000-year Blood War, we don't have any right to try and latch on to that savior." "Kurosaki Ichigo, the one who even beat Hogyoku Aizen," someone added. Hirako felt a pang of regret, but he didn't dwell on it. The thought was dismissed quickly. On the screen, the feed had gone deep crimson and then cut out, ending on the exploding red crescent. The image went black. A murmur ran through the Vizorid. If the revelations about Ichigo had only just begun, the labels already stuck fast. Reversal, power-up, never say die, stronger after every battle. In short, anyone who fights Ichigo and doesn't truly kill him will be countered and crushed in the end. The two devastating matches they had just watched were proof enough. They wanted to know who would be Ichigo's next opponent. As a group of onlookers, watching others get thrashed had become strange entertainment. The black screen flickered back to life. A new scene streamed in. "Here we go," someone breathed. Who's the unlucky opponent this time? A Shinigami? An Arankar? A Quincy? Silently leaning forward, the visored stared at the image. The camera hadn't even stabilized before a loud clang echoed through the feed, like a heavy gate being opened. Huh? Every visored frowned at once, and then they all turned toward the warehouse entrance in the real room, the big metal door, now firmly closed. 3 seconds of silence, then as one, their faces went pale. Holy crap! That sound! It was the iron shutter being rolled up. They were stunned. Hirako impulsively picked up the controller and hit start, just to test it. The result was the same. The sound from the video matched what they'd heard in the warehouse. No way, the next unlucky ones are us? The Vizord? Hirako's first thought flashed to the gruesome images of 2 captains being beaten. He broke out in a cold sweat. Why did they always seem to get dragged into this? The Vizord had been treated like cannon fodder before. Why again? Then the footage cleared. The shot opened on the rolling shutter rising slowly, and through it walked a young man with orange hair and his hands in his pockets. It's Ichigo Kurosaki. They recognized him at a glance. Hands flew to mouths. He actually came. He came here on his own? But surely he's not thinking of taking on all 8 of us, is he? He can't be serious. Their initial shock turned to unease. Ichigo's sullen expression and casual gait made him look like trouble. Memories of Kenpachi Zaraki and the others being beaten surfaced and fists clenched. Anger and surprise burned in their chests. As Ichigo stepped into the warehouse, the camera panned slowly up, following his gaze, and revealed every level of the hidden base. It exposed the Vizord waiting there. Hirako's mouth twitched into a welcoming smile under his cap. He leaned forward and called out his opening line. "You finally came on your own. Ichigo, looks like you've decided to join us after all." That smile and that greeting sent ripples far beyond the warehouse. In Las Noches, Aizen's trio reacted with interest. Ichimaru Gin, lounging beneath his blood-stained throne, narrowed his eyes and let his foxy smile spread. "Oh, so that's why Ichigo was so rough on you back at Karakura Town," he drawled. "Seems the Vizord were pulling strings behind the scenes. They must have provoked him a fair bit." Aizen remained thoughtful and silent, not one to jump to conclusions. Still, curiosity laced his voice when he finally spoke. "Jin, Ichigo joining the Vizord is surprising, yes. But more importantly, how do they control hollowification? And how did Ichigo handle Hollow White during their experiments?" He leaned forward. "After all, that kind of existence doesn't look like something that could be easily tamed, does it?" Meanwhile, back in the human world, in the general store, Kurosaki Isshin's voice rose in displeasure. "How did Ichigo get involved with the Vizord? That lot's a secretive bunch. What if they lead my son astray?" He spoke sharply, the worry of a father cutting through the indignation, aware, too, that many of the faces involved used to be captains of the Gotei 13, though from different eras. Their pasts only made the situation more complicated and the answers harder to find. Kurosaki Isshin had left the Soul Society of his own accord back then, while the Vizord had been forced to defect. Even though they both lived in Karakura Town, Isshin hadn't been particularly close to them over the years, apart from a few accidental encounters. He never had a good impression of a group that had lived in the shadows nursing grudges for so long. Urahara Kisuke, standing nearby, found the news of Ichigo joining the Vizord intriguing. He chuckled and tried to reassure Isshin. "Don't worry, Isshin. Hirako Shinji is a little unreliable, but I know him. He won't mess around." Urahara said it with such certainty that he looked relaxed rather than worried. He even seemed excited at the prospect of Ichigo learning to hollowfy. But as they watched the footage, Ichigo's deliberate entrance ended almost as soon as it began. The video skipped, and then cut straight to a fight. The clash of steel rang out in the abandoned warehouse's open center. 2 figures, Zanpakuto drawn, were locked in combat. The Vizord in the room went silent when they saw the small girl in a red tracksuit among them, Hiyori Saragaki. Hiyori, you idiot. You actually jumped Ichigo by yourself? Someone blurted. They all stared at Hiyori. After all their talk, she hadn't even exchanged a sentence with Ichigo before the camera switched to a fight. Was that how they welcomed new allies? It was brutal even for the Vizord. Feeling the accusing looks, Hiyori turned her head and sniffed. Don't look at me like that. I don't know what's going on. She fumed inwardly. She wasn't stupid. She hadn't meant to throw herself needlessly into danger. A few minutes earlier, they'd been discussing how risky it was to go up against Ichigo. Still, when the screen zoomed in on her and her pupils dilated with panic, she realized the fight was tilting against her. Her voice, distorted by hollowification, came through the recording with an auto-tuned edge. Ichigo, you coward! It looks like you know that yourself, another voice answered. If you go Bankai against someone like us, you can't hold the hollow in, Hiyori taunted, lifting her mask with one hand and deliberately goading him. You're always been afraid of this. The First Division's captains watching the video exchanged puzzled looks at those words. Did she just say she was strong? Someone asked. Does she really think she has a guaranteed win? Those who knew Hiyori's personality scoffed. If she was provoking Ichigo, she was just asking for a beating. Their worry proved justified. Hiyori attacked with a furious shout. You bald bastard! I'm sick of your cowardice! She drew her Zanpakuto and lashed out, and the audience murmured at her boldness. But as her strike neared, the recording suddenly slowed. Then the ominous background music kicked in. It's the death theme, the trigger for the counterkill. He's going to hollowfy, someone shouted. Having seen this before, the captains weren't surprised. They were tense with anticipation. Ichigo's hollowification was about to activate. A harsh laugh echoed as time seemed to snap backward to Sokyoku Hill. The hollowified Ichigo didn't waste words. Once his control returned, he swung Tensa Zangetsu with explosive force. The impact launched Hiyori backward with a blast of air. Before she could smash into the cracked wall, Ichigo flashed to her side in a blur, seized her with raw strength, and pinned her. With his free hand, he crushed the hollow mask against her face. Air was forced from her lungs. Her ability to move and breathe was stripped away. Hiyori dangled in midair, eyes rolling white, barely clinging to consciousness. The captains watched in stunned silence. Each hollowification had become faster and more brutal. The time from Ichigo waking to counterattacking to almost choking Hiyori into unconsciousness had been under 10 seconds. In less than that, he could incapacitate a century-old captain with his bare hands. Ichigo's hollowification power was getting terrifying, and as they reacted with a mixture of awe and pity, one thought settled over them. Hiyori Saragaki had brought this on herself. Chapter 198, Classic Scene. The King and His Mount. The sound of someone spitting blood cut the room. In the abandoned warehouse in the real world, Hiyori Saragaki clutched her chest and coughed up blood, the memory of nearly being strangled by Ichigo replaying in her mind. Her vision blurred, and she nearly fainted on the spot. Are you kidding me? She muttered. What was I thinking back then? Showing off in front of Ichigo. How foolish. Luckily, the other 7 Visored had intervened just in time, subduing Ichigo in his hollowified state and saving her from real danger. Still, Hiyori couldn't shake the humiliation of how she'd looked. She felt she'd embarrassed herself for everyone to see. Hiyori, you're really brave, aren't you? Hirako Shinji said, giving a sarcastic thumbs up. Just now, you set a record. You were defeated by hollowified Ichigo in under 10 seconds. Looks like the Visored are destined to be underestimated. Hirako rubbed his temples. He had hoped Ichigo's arrival would highlight the Visored, but instead it had been another crushing defeat, and one that lasted an absurdly short time. Shh! Hirako, shut up! The footage changed again. Hiyori snapped, pointing at the transparent light screen. Sure enough, after the Visored jointed subdued Ichigo, the inventory video fast-forwarded. The new scene showed a vast underground chamber beneath the warehouse, with a painted sky of blue and white clouds and layers of keto barriers shimmering around them. Oh, look! Mashiro Kuna, dressed in her usual odd attire, covered her mouth in surprise. In the center of the chamber, there are 5 concentric keto barriers, and Ichigo, he's fallen in the middle, his head and limbs bound by gochujuteken. All 8 of us are standing guard around the barriers, Hirako said, frowning. Every one of us looks serious. He felt a rising unease. Urahara Kisuke had been secretly helping them master holofication, yes, but the major progress had been their own hard work, understanding their souls, refining their control over their spiritual bodies, years of training and accumulation. Holofication had never been something achieved overnight, yet Hiyori still bore a bruise on her neck from being strangled by Hollow-Feet Ichigo. The wound had not yet healed. That suggested the footage was only a few days old, probably less than 3 days. And in those 3 days, Ichigo's arrival had prompted them to prepare defenses for his complete holofication, to achieve in 3 days what they had spent nearly 100 years working toward. Hirako couldn't help but gasp. In only 3 days, Ichigo had done what they themselves had only ever managed slowly. He was willing to bet everything to save time, willing to risk damnation for speed. That kind of recklessness could cost him his soul. It also made him undeniably heroic in Hirako's eyes. He deserved the title Savior of the 1,000-Year Blood War. By the way, Kensei Mugaruma asked, curiosity showing in his voice, if they're cutting off his consciousness like that, does it mean Ichigo will have to confront Hollow White directly in his soul space? Recalling the overwhelming presence of Shiro Ichigo, Hollow White, Kensei's massive frame trembled with a mixture of fear and awe. Hollow White was the king of hollows, even stronger than a Vasto Lord. If Hollow White devoured Ichigo's soul and took over his body, even all 8 Visored might not be able to stop him. What, are you scared? Hirako scoffed at the panic in Kensei's question. He rolled his eyes dismissively. No way, Kensei. Ichigo is risking his life himself, and you're already worrying about failure? Don't you have any backbone? How can you call yourself his companion? Before anyone could answer, the video switched again, drawing everyone's attention. The screen stabilized on Ichigo Kurosaki's soul space, the same eerie world of continuous rain and inverted skyscrapers. This time, Ichigo stood on top of one of those buildings, wearing his Shinigami robes and gripping his Zanpakuto. His eyes were steady, devoid of the panic or confusion seen before. Veins stood out on his forearms as he clenched the hilt. From the moment he opened his eyes in that world, he had decided he would face Hollow White head-on. His courage renewed something in the Watchers. In truth, said Jushiro Ukitake in the First Division, voice threaded with pity, he was just an ordinary high school student not long ago. Facing a monster like Hollow White alone, this is a lot for someone so new to being a Shinigami. It was true that Ichigo's experiences were extraordinary, bordering on unfair, but his perseverance and indomitable fighting spirit were what had carried him this far. Before the captains could finish their murmured responses, a voice sliced through the lifeless, rain-soaked soul space, sharp, domineering, and familiar to many in body and bone. Yo! Shiro Ichigo's voice rang out. Long time no see, my king. Chapter 199, It Devoured Yuwak. A heavy silence filled the gloomy void. Then a voice, sharp, arrogant, and cold, cut through the air. Yo! The camera swung, focusing on the source. It closed in until every detail was clear. Across the Soul Society, stunned gasps erupted. It's him. It really is Shiro Ichigo. He has a Zanpakuto this time, on his back no less. That behavior, it's like a Shinigami. Can a Menos Grande really do this? The captains stared at the screen in disbelief. Shiro Ichigo crouched, and strapped to his back was a Zanpakuto wrapped in black strips. Its shape and aura were the perfect inverse of Zangetsu, darker, more malignant. The close-up left no doubt. 20 years ago, the Hollow White who had battled Shiba Ishin could only roar and swing a primitive arm blade. Now he was fully humanoid. Everything about him had shifted, echoing Kurosaki Ichigo's own evolution, hollow to something resembling a Shinigami. The captain's mind sprinted to one name, Aizen. He's a reverse evolution, someone breathed, a Menos Grande moving toward Shinigami form. Aizen's work, then. This is unprecedented. Even the captain commander wore a grave expression. They had expected oddities in soul space, but nothing like this. A high-tier Menos Grande awakening a Zanpakuto. The implications were terrifying. Nemu Kurotsuchi's eyes widened beneath her mask. A mad thought slid free of caution. Could that white Zangetsu be more than Shikai? She asked quietly. What do you mean? A voice demanded. Bankai, Nemu said. Is it possible Shiro Ichigo could use Bankai? The squadron fell into stunned silence. a king-level Menos Grande, and now the suggestion he might possess a Bankai was unthinkable. For a moment, every captain felt the breath leave their lungs. On the feed, Shiro Ichigo's voice, laced with a mocking autotune that made it sound both brutal and boastful, taunted Kurosaki Ichigo. "Ichigo, why are your eyes darting around? Found something troubling?" Kurosaki Ichigo's brow tightened. The words on the screen clicked into place for viewers. "Where did Zangetsu go?" Shiro Ichigo sneered. "Zangetsu? Where did he run off to?" Urahara Kisuke watched from the shop, surprise flashing across his face. Like the captains, he was stunned at the Hollow's complete Shinigami-like transformation. But beyond surprise, a darker possibility occurred to him. The first time he'd seen Shiro Ichigo, something about him and the Zanpakuto had hinted at a strange, intimate connection. "Watch," Urahara murmured, thinking aloud. Could he have been devoured? Kurosaki Isshin, sitting nearby, felt a cold sweat prick his skin. The idea was insane, but whether insane or not, if Yuak had truly been consumed by Hollow White, the stakes for Ichigo had just gone through the roof. On the screen, Hollow White's grin widened into something openly contemptuous. "Idiot," he mocked. "You still haven't figured it out." Shiro Ichigo reached, arrogantly, for the hilt at his back. He pulled the sword free in a single fluid motion, leapt and slashed down at Kurosaki Ichigo with a savage howl that fused laughter and fury. As the blade flashed, he hissed words that sent chills through every viewer. "I am Zangetsu." The declaration, insane, confident, and terrifying, was backed by the clash of steel and the heat of latent rare Yoku. It replayed across every channel, ricocheting through the Soul Society and into every watching soul. Captains and lieutenants alike watched the footage, hearts sinking. "If he says he's Zangetsu, maybe Yuak has been eaten by him," someone whispered. "No," another voice answered, horrified. "Yuak, the Quincy King, devoured by a Menos Grande?" The screens showed Shiro Ichigo swinging that black-wrapped Zanpakuto, gloating and fierce. The possibility that he'd swallowed Yuak, the ancient, malevolent sword spirit, left viewers aghast. If Yuak had been consumed, then more than one threat had changed sides. The nature of the danger had shifted into something far more volatile. For a heartbeat, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. The image on the screen, the white hollow claiming Zangetsu, rearranged history and expectation in an instant. Shiro Ichigo's laughter echoed as the feed cut. In its wake came a new, darker consensus. This Shiro Ichigo was not merely another enemy. If he had indeed absorbed Yuak, then what stood before Kurosaki Ichigo was not only dangerous, he was far more malevolent than Yuak had ever been. It is a true evil god. P.S. The Nine Blades don't count, even if they can wield Shibakai and Zanpakuto. After releasing Bankai, its true form is just a low-tier Jillian. Far below this. Chapter 200, Shiro Ichigo is the true Zanpakuto spirit. Clang! Clang! Steel rang on steel as blades met, sparks sprang across the soul space like rain. The black figure on the recording was being driven back, beaten from one end to the other, utterly helpless. Kurosaki Isshin watched with a face full of dread. As a father, he was pale with worry. There is nothing more devastating in this world than seeing your son slaughtered, the white-haired figure sending off the black-haired boy. At this rate, Isshin thought, it wouldn't be long before he was forced to witness that fate. Urahara Kisuke, sensing Isshin's tension, patted his shoulder and remained unruffled. "Isshin-san, I know you're anxious about your son," he said. "But haven't you noticed, even now, when the situation is hopeless, Ichigo's eyes are as steady as ever?" Urahara had been watching Kurosaki Ichigo closely since White Ichigo swung his blade. He'd expected Ichigo, barely 15 and a newly minted Shinigami, to be terrified. Even as a detached viewer, watching the recording had filled him with the same despair that hung heavy inside the soul space. But Ichigo's reaction surprised him. Instead of freezing, the boy's fighting spirit flared. Even while greatly outmatched, he refused to give up and kept searching for Zangetsu. That persistence and composure, so far beyond his years, opened Urahara's eyes, and many others in the audience. "So what are you saying?" Isshin asked, brows drawn tight. There was no patience for philosophical musings in his chest, only fear. "This proves it," Urahara replied evenly. "Ichigo is no longer relying only on outside crutches and lucky breaks. He's starting to value his own strength and the bond with his Zanpakuto. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so relentless in trying to find Zangetsu." Cheating and unexpected comebacks were thrilling, Urahara admitted, but the path of a Shinigami is measured in decades, centuries, sometimes millennia. Dependence on luck and external tricks doomed one's chances of reaching the true heights. Ichigo was walking the right road. But what if the Zanpakuto spirit really has been devoured? Ishin shook his head. Even if Ichigo searches, it'll be useless. On the screen, Ichigo's voice cut through the clash of steel. "Speak up! Where did you hide Zangetsu? Show yourself!" He swung his sword, sharp and demanding. White Ichigo, the cold, pale hollow that had been pressuring him, sneered and shoved the boy back with a sweep of its blade. "Tch! Ichigo, you're so annoying! How many times do I have to tell you? I am Zangetsu." White Ichigo's roar set the viewers murmuring. "That's odd," Kyoraku Shunsui said, frowning. "It's mentioned the same thing over and over. Didn't it say it was Zangetsu at least 10 times? Why would a Menos Grande, a hollow of that scale, be so fixated on being a Zanpakuto spirit?" Shunsui's tone was baffled. Hollow White's behavior was not like other Menos Grande. Those creatures were brutal and bloodthirsty by nature, reveling in slaughter. But this one chased an identity, Zangetsu. That was not the stance of an ordinary Menos Grande. It was unnerving. Across from him, Soifon surprised everyone by voicing what many felt. "If it's true, that explains why you walked from 1,000 years ago suddenly appeared in Ichigo's soul space," she said. "From the very start, he couldn't have been the Zanpakuto spirit." The captains fell silent at Soifon's words. A hollow of Menos Grande or higher actually being a Zanpakuto spirit, unheard of. It sounded preposterous. Yet Nemu Kurotsuchi beside them smiled and nodded. "Heh, I actually agree with Soifon," Nemu said. "Don't forget, in the footage Aizen showed, he said Hollow White was composed of hundreds of dead Shinigami souls. Therefore," Nemu continued with a cool certainty, "its soul essence is Shinigami." He cleared his throat and let the barb hang in the air. "Most of you here spend your time fighting and killing. You don't do Zanpakuto research. How can you be so sure that Menos power and Shinigami essence can't be combined?" Nemu's tone was laced with scorn. The captains bristled, unable to answer. He was right. Their judgments were based on combat experience and intuition, not on study. Still, doubts lingered among some. Kuchiki Byakuya, who had been soundly bested by White Ichigo, couldn't bring himself to accept the possibility that Hollow White might be the embodiment of Shinigami power. To do so would compound his humiliation. "Nemu," Byakuya snapped coldly, "how do you explain the vanished Ewok? If Hollow White is truly the Zanpakuto spirit, then what was the identity of the Ewok that existed in Ichigo's soul space 1,000 years ago? It can't just have been an illusion." Byakuya's words were sharp. He raised his voice to make his point intimidating. Nemu only sneered and answered without hesitation. "It's simple. This isn't complicated at all. Have you forgotten the scene where Kurosaki Masaki defeated Hollow White?" Nemu leaned in, his voice low and sure. "That Yehwak from 1,000 years ago, the one Ichigo called Zangetsu Uncle, was the embodiment of Quincy power. And that Quincy power originated from Kurosaki Masaki." The room fell quiet. Chapter 201, What a Pair of Star-Crossed Lovers. From all the clips that had been shown, Nemu Kurotsuchi had, in only a few words, unmasked the secret inside Kurosaki Ichigo's soul. "Ichigo, how many times do I have to tell you before you understand?" the white figure shouted in the footage. "I am Zangetsu. Zangetsu is me." As the live audience argued over the screen, the Hollow White's impatience in the video grew, bordering on anxious. That only bolstered the suspicions of those who had already guessed the truth. "Did you hear that?" He said it again. "The truth must be what we thought." At the shop, Urahara Kisuke allowed himself a faint smile. While Nemu had just exposed the secret in the first division, the footage had simultaneously revealed the truth here. Kurosaki Ishin was left speechless. "No way. I was worrying for nothing?" He'd been tense the whole time, only to find the whole plot was almost melodramatic. The fight that had looked like a Menos Grande about to devour its host had actually been guided, intentionally, by Hollow White. It felt too contrived. Even after Urahara's analysis and after hearing Hollow White repeatedly insist in the clip that it was Zangetsu, the Zanpakuto spirit, Ishin still couldn't shake his unease. He kept glancing back at his son with worry. "Ichigo, when will you finally wake up?" he muttered. Watching Ichigo's eyelids remain shut, He let out a heavy sigh. Urahara chuckled. Ishin, don't worry too much. In the end, Hollow White will probably go easy. But the instant Urahara finished, the video showed White Ichigo losing patience. Perhaps because Kurosaki Ichigo wouldn't accept it, he lashed out, White Zangetsu flashing in a storm of slashes. Ichigo was battered and thrown from the sky, crashing into the broken ruins below. Ishin's eyelids twitched. The brief loosening of his nerves snapped taut again. He shot Urahara a reproachful look. You call this going easy? If that had been 2 more waves, he'd be dead. Urahara spread his hands helplessly. As an outsider, he could see the truth, but he was still speechless at this abusive dynamic. Hollow White, why couldn't you be gentler with Kurosaki Ichigo? And Ichigo, why won't you just listen? Truly, you two were a pair of star-crossed lovers. When Ichigo heard that defeating himself might bring Zangetsu back, he surged with fighting spirit. He prepared to use his Bankai to gain the upper hand against the Shikai White Zangetsu. He didn't expect White Ichigo to answer with the same move. Bankai! 2 different voices rang out at once in the footage, followed by a tremendous wave of Reiatsu. 2 forces, blue and dark red, crushed down, oppressively heavy. Holy! Bankai! White Ichigo can really use Bankai? After the Reiatsu storm died, the captains gathered in the first division stared at the long, white Tensa Zangetsu clutched in White Ichigo's hand, dumbfounded. The sight sent cold sweat trickling down their spines. This is incredible, one muttered. A legendary Hollow King, wielding a Zanpakuto and using Bankai. If it truly harbors malice and can seize Ichigo's body, another warned, during the Ryoka invasion, it alone could probably cut through the Gote 13. Kuchiki Byakuya felt a private relief. Facing the temporary White Ichigo on Sokyoku Hill, he'd survived by the skin of his teeth. He had no desire to meet that thing again. It's terrifying. Probably only the Captain Commander could match that level. Toshiro Hitsugaya, eyeing the white blade, couldn't help but comment, I actually think the white Tensa Zangetsu looks better, admiring how the color emphasized the blade's edges. Captain? Matsumoto Ranjiku's anxious voice came from behind. More to the point, we should be worried about how Kurosaki Ichigo will get through this. If he dies, a captain finished, we don't just lose a savior, we could unleash a Hollow King. That possibility snapped everyone back into focus. The captains cheered almost comically for Ichigo in unison. Kurosaki Ichigo, please, you must win. Back in the video, after another desperate exchange came the final, decisive moment. Did you forget that I was the first to use Getsuga Tensho in Bankai? White Ichigo taunted. You've only ever been a useless imitator. Good for nothing. Before the insult finished echoing, White Ichigo flickered, as if cutting through space, and reappeared right in front of Kurosaki Ichigo. He seized Tensa Zangetsu with his bare hand. The next instant, Ichigo's black Zanpakuto was flooded with hollow power, seemingly assimilated, its blackness bleaching pure white in a blink before crumbling into dust. Is it over? Will Kurosaki Ichigo be devoured? Every viewer held their breath, eyes glued to the screen. The hollowification battle had reached its heart-stopping climax. The outcome would decide who was king and who would wind up ridden. Chapter 202, We Were Actually Taught a Lesson by Amenos Grande. Ichigo. Do you know the difference between a king and a steed? Shiro Ichigo twirled the hilt of his Zanpakuto across his fingertips with effortless calm. Ichigo Kurosaki's jaw tightened into a small, unreadable smile as Shiro's white, swallow-tailed coat fluttered in the blast of spiritual pressure. In that moment, the outcome felt inevitable. With a single motion, the blade dissolved into white dust. Kurosaki's hands were empty. As his Zanpakuto vanished, something else slipped away with it, the fighting spirit in his eyes. He stood there hollowed out. It's over. If even the strongest resolve falters. Kurosaki Ichigo, this time there's truly no turning back. In the First Division barracks, the Soul Reaper captains watched the recorded footage in stunned silence. Seeing a warrior disarmed and watched by an enemy who had just devoured his blade, and who lingered like a vulture waiting to devour the soul, that was despair in its truest form. The charged tension in the room collapsed into dismay. Many lowered their heads and turned away from the screen. Then, breaking the quiet, Zaraki Kenpachi laughed, a guttural, savage sound. What is this, you forgetful fools? He barked, baring his teeth like an animal. Have you already forgotten how he was beaten before? The soundtrack hasn't even started, and you're crowning his defeat? What makes you so sure Kurosaki will lose? His roar was a bucket of cold water on the other captain's morale, dousing their premature resignation with something fiercer: memory and defiance. "Oh, right," someone murmured. "He was beaten before, but—" "There's no rule saying the same trick can't be turned back on the trickster," Kenpachi added, grim and amused. Eyes returned to the screen, expectant again. Shiro Ichigo's lecture resumed, crisp and cold through the speakers. "Whether it's posture, ability, or power, if there are two identical existences," he said, "one becomes king to dominate, and the other becomes a steed to magnify strength. Do you understand the difference?" His voice was not merely arrogant. It carried a feral certainty and an accusation directed at Kurosaki's faltering will. "There is only one answer," he said finally. "Instinct." A high, otherworldly shriek tore from the video, a sound that carried like a superdimensional wave. Windows rattled. The barracks fell back from their monitors as if physically struck. The captains felt the weight of something ancient and absolute. Instinct? Kenpachi's eyes widened. Retsu Unohana's brow tightened. Among the captains, Kenpachi and Unohana, those two who most craved the thrill of battle, understood immediately what Shiro meant. "The truly decisive thing when two forces are equal," Shiro continued on the screen, brandishing his Zanpakuto in a casual, elegant flourish, "is the willingness to seek battle at any cost, to seek power, to destroy the enemy without mercy, to grind them into dust, to hunger for combat absolutely." His words struck like a salvo, and one by one the captains found themselves probing those notions. It took a moment for the implications to settle. "No, it can't be just me," Kyoraku Shunsui said slowly, rubbing his temples. He cast a guilty glance toward the front of the room, toward Captain Commander Yamamoto, and what he saw stopped him cold. Even Yamamoto Junryusai, the captain commander himself, stood rooted in thought. Kyoraku's astonishment was visible. Of everyone in the Gotei 13, Yamamoto had been the most implacable opponent of anything resembling Menos Grande. He had been relentless about the lessons of the hollowification incident 100 years past, had kept even the visored under a shadow to warn the entire corps away from the red lines surrounding hollows. Yet here, watching the footage, his composure betrayed the stirrings of something else. Shiro Ichigo's words echoed in the old man's mind. To fight regardless, to crush and destroy without hesitation, to accept no mercy in battle. Yamamoto's expression did not change, but his inner calm had been unsettled. He remembered himself from 1,000 years past, not the cautious, tempered commander he had become, but the unflinching warrior Shiro described, one who gave nothing back in combat. Years of peace had dulled that edge, layered doubt over certainty. Now, listening to this impossible voice, some long-buried clarity returned. The old commander felt the fog lift. An old resolve, once buried, reawakened. He was not alone. All across the room, other captains received similar sparks of recognition. Even those who trusted only in logic found themselves affected. Mayuri Kurotsuchi's lips twisted into a rare smile as he leaned forward. "Nemu, what are you standing there for?" He barked at his lieutenant. "Take notes. Every single word he says. Don't miss a thing." "Who is this speaking?" Nemu asked, obedient and expressionless. "The Hollow King himself," Mayuri said, eyes bright. "Every syllable comes from the source. If the recording hadn't been exposed, we'd never have had the honor of hearing this lecture." Mayuri's excitement was plain as he watched the footage, as if each sentence were a new specimen to dissect. Around him, captains sat in varying states of agitation, reflection, and something that could almost be called hunger. The recorded voice continued, and the barracks listened. "Write it all down. When necessary, recite the whole thing from memory." Chapter 203. Is this called defeat? Didn't he just commit suicide? "Ichigo, everything I just told you, you don't have any of those raw instincts. You've always held yourself back, fighting with reason. You want to swing your sword, but you keep it sheathed. Who do you expect to cut like that?" If it weren't for Shiro Ichigo's perpetually fierce, savage expression, tinged with an unmistakable smug disdain, anyone who heard his voice without seeing the screen would have assumed he was howling in blind, red-faced fury. In truth, he was simply looking down on his host. Every time Ichigo Kurosaki faltered, Shiro Ichigo watched from within the soul space with growing contempt. Those so-called Soul Reaper captains, what good were they? Ichigo had a Zanpakuto as powerful as Zangetsu. Why did he always end up looking so pathetic? The phrase Shiro Ichigo repeated most often, "Be careful or I'll take over your body," wasn't idle bluster. Every time he saw Ichigo getting hammered, he wanted to take control and finish it himself. And when his berating was done, he made good on his threat without mercy. He drove the white Tensa Zangetsu straight into Ichigo's abdomen. "Ichigo," he sneered. Blood sprayed, painting the spotless white swallow-tailed coat in bright red. Shiro Ichigo leaned in close, grinning as he spoke his final words to Ichigo Kurosaki. "Ichigo, since you are weaker than me, I'll crush you. Then I'll become the new Hollow King." Ha! His manic laughter cut through the air, accompanied by a malevolent dark red Reiatsu that exploded outward. The dread it carried was so corrupting it felt like a disaster incarnate. The effect on viewers was instantaneous and deadly. Even the mighty Soul Reaper captains Espada, Sternritter were drained of color. Many felt their minds hollowed out, their souls eaten, their bodies go rigid as if possessed. All of it from a single laugh and a contemptuous gaze from the Hollow King across space. "It's terrifying." Yushiro Ukitake gasped, the hair on his scalp prickling. After hearing Shiro Ichigo's roar, he began coughing instinctively. His already pale face went ashen. If Shiro Ichigo had shouted a few more times, would the old captain have just dropped dead on the spot? The dread that had suffused the captains and the gloom in the First Division, however, changed in an instant. Blood droplets were suddenly spilling across the transparent screen, covering Ichigo's form like a sign that he was being devoured. Then, just as the crimson threatened to swallow the whole image, a rhythmic drumbeat sounded. Thump, thump. It paused, then came again. Thump, thump. The air, time, everything seemed to harden. The power of faith, the simple, stubborn belief and fighting spirit, returned. With it came delighted exclamations from the captains. "It's here! It's finally here! The familiar BGM, the classic comeback moment, has arrived." For some inexplicable reason, the captains all smiled with satisfaction when the battle music began. It was as if the whole long spectacle of the king and his mount had been a build-up to this single familiar cue. Kurosaki Ichigo, without his Zanpakuto, how can he possibly beat Shiro Ichigo? The captains wondered, watching with bated breath as anticipation built to a fever pitch. Then, within Ichigo himself, clarity struck. His eyelids had been lowered, his gaze vacant and colorless, but now light burst into his eyes. The mask of aimless defeat peeled away. Seeking battle, instinct. The sword must never be surrendered. At the moment Shiro Ichigo pulled the white Tensa Zangetsu free from Ichigo's abdomen, Ichigo suddenly reached out. His arm, recharged with conviction, closed around the blade. What happened next stunned everyone watching. He just touched it, and the white Tensa Zangetsu turned black. Now it's Shiro Ichigo who loses his weapon. Inside the First Division, the captains gaped as Ichigo Kurosaki, sword in hand again, lifted his head with a new, confident look. The instant his fingers made contact, the white blade darkened, and the arm Shiro Ichigo was using to wield the sword seared and disintegrated. "No way, that's it?" muttered more than one captain. In previous encounters, Ichigo had at least swung his Zanpakuto a few times before mounting one of his dramatic comebacks. This time, he hadn't even needed to cut. Just touching the sword ended the fight. It was absurd, outrageous, beyond anything they'd seen before. Shiro Ichigo's body began to ash, and as it crumbled, he managed to gasp his final bitter words. "There's no choice. Since you defeated me, I'll call you the king, for now." At that, the captains could no longer hold back. "Damn it," they cried. "Shiro Ichigo, enough! Aren't you done putting on an act? Is this defeat? Didn't you just commit suicide?" Note, the battle music that cued Ichigo's surge is Battle Ignition from the Shinigami soundtrack, an especially rousing theme. Chapter 214, Fierce Battle in Hueco Mundo. Grimjo panics. Urahara Kisuke, you were right. I never expected this devourment battle to end like this. It's completely unexpected. On the screen, Shiro Ichigo's body burned away into countless tiny black fragments, which swirled and were absorbed into the core of Tensa Zangetsu. Watching that, Isshin Kurosaki's eyelids twitched. His first reaction was the same as the Soul Reaper captain's, stunned into silence. Isshin Kurosaki couldn't help but grumble. Seriously, Ichigo's acting was way too clumsy. If he meant to sacrifice himself from the start, why did he have to put on such a scene earlier? All that fuss for nothing. I'm so fed up. He tore his gaze away and looked toward the spot behind him. One look and he couldn't hide his surprise. He's awake. Ichigo, he's finally awake. On Kurosaki Ichigo's face, a new white hollowification mask had formed. If you looked closely, you could see his once closed eyes slowly opening beneath it. Following Isshin's gaze, everyone else turned. One look was enough to puzzle them. Yoriichi clicked her tongue. Is it me, or has Ichigo gotten a lot stronger? Before the famous King and Steed moment, Ichigo had already been soaking up combat experience and techniques by watching that strange video. But his spiritual power had always been weak. Without special training or actual battle experience, he shouldn't have become stronger out of nowhere. Yet when the hollow white power in the video fully merged with the Zanpakuto, that power seemed to leap across time and pour into Ichigo's real body. From that moment, his spiritual power was no longer a blank. He had somehow inherited hollow white's strength. His spiritual pressure spiked, suddenly captain level. Tesei Tsukubishi stared, dumbfounded. Unbelievable. How can something like this happen? Even the great Taoist looked green with envy when he felt the faint but potent surge radiating from Ichigo. Urahara Kisuke, however, remained calm. He turned casually to the transparent screen and smiled faintly. Tesei, what's the surprise? A screen that can show the past and future appeared out of nowhere. If this can happen, who knows what else might show up? Urahara wondered privately whether the screen might even display events from parallel timelines later. The thought excited him. Under the crowd's astonished gazes, fully awakened Ichigo slowly removed the hollowification mask. He exhaled deeply, stretched his nearly stiff limbs, and rose to his feet. Ichigo, how do you feel? Isshin asked, hurrying over, concerned. Dad, I'm fine. Don't worry. Ichigo nodded and gave a bright, easy smile. Even with his sudden power surge and the inexplicable inheritance of hollow white's strength, he seemed composed, calm and resolute, the same certainty the Ichigo in the video had worn. Ho ho ho, well done, Ichigo, Urahara chuckled. Looks like you're in fine shape. No special training required now. Yoriichi eyed the hollow mask clinging to his cheek. Can you control it on your own now? No problem, Ichigo answered, though he added, but I don't think the hollowification will last long. Under everyone's renewed scrutiny, Ichigo placed his hand over his face. With a single thought, the old mask shattered. White matter condensed and reformed into a new, striking hollowification mask. Beneath it, Ichigo's eyes had turned an eerie yellow-brown, cold and predatory. His look was unsettling. His voice carried a faint electronic undertone, as if filtered through something inhuman. But I estimate the hollowification will only last about 30 seconds, he said, not completely certain. That's more than enough. Isshin puffed, giving a proud thumbs up. Whether in the future or now, you've proven you're strong enough. No sooner had the praise been uttered than the transparent screen behind them, which had gone dark when the image ended, flared to life again. A new replay began. This is Hueco Mundo? They blinked and soon recognized the endless white desert. Ichigo, after breaking into the Soul Society as a Ryoka, had apparently gone to Hueco Mundo afterward. The adults glanced at Ichigo with exasperated amusement. Kid, always causing trouble. At Las Noches, the Arrancar army, watching the same scene, shuddered. The thought of Ichigo in Hueco Mundo set off alarm. Damn it! Not only the Soul Reapers, are we Arrancar supposed to suffer too? Even the arrogant Espada fell silent, their auras tightened. Ichigo now wielded hollow white and had the backing of the Vasto Lord. He was no longer the inexperienced youth who'd managed to hang on by luck. How could they possibly deal with him? Oh my, Ichimaru Gin's voice dripped sarcasm. I wonder which lucky soul will be chosen to face Kurosaki Ichigo next. The screen answered him. The camera pulled away from the empty desert and onto a nearby battlefield of shattered ruins. A defiant roar echoed across the desolation. Kurosaki Ichigo, a voice snarled through the ruinous wind. This time you won't have any luck. I will tear your body to pieces myself. Chapter 205. This woman, she's a cheat too. On the high platform, the Leopard King, hands shoved in his pockets, sky blue hair tousled, watched the broadcast with growing unease. What had begun as curiosity froze into disbelief. No way. Ichigo Kurosaki's next opponent after mastering hollowification is me? Grimjo muttered, eyes wide. I actually became his stepping stone? He swore under his breath, panic briefly flashing across his features. The video cut quickly to another scene. The first image had already seized everyone's attention. The second was even more shocking. A small figure on the ground, mask cracked and incomplete like broken porcelain, was wailing, "Wah! Ichigo, don't die. It's Nell's fault. You were killed by an espada while protecting Nell. Please, you must live." That plaintive sob, broadcast across the Soul Society, sent ripples of alarm through every corner of the Seirete. What? Did I hear that right? Ichigo was killed? Captains of the Gote 13 stared at the screen, stunned. When he fought them, Ichigo always pressed on through impossible odds and after activating his cheats, turned the tide with overwhelming force. How could their destined protagonist be dead the moment he crossed into Hueco Mundo? Who could have killed him? An Arrancar? They had never been able to put him down like this during the Ryoka incursions. This was impossible. The feed cut again, lingering on the child who was sobbing on her knees. Beside her lay a corpse, face frozen, eyes vacant, the life abruptly snuffed out, and the body already cooling. It was unmistakable. "It's Ichigo Kurosaki," someone blurted. "Look at that, his chest. There's a huge hollowed wound. It looks like he was ripped open from the inside." The captains could only stare. The sight of Ichigo's slack, lifeless face and the great gash in his torso was a blow none of them expected. This wasn't the sort of sudden death they could imagine being inflicted by the Gote 13 during a full-scale interception. How had it happened? Yet the Arrancar were not focused on Ichigo's corpse. Their attention was fixed on the green-haired child, on the little girl known as Nell. Nell? Faces across Las Noches sharpened with recognition. Beneath the antelope skull fragment of a mask, a cascade of lake green hair, under gray-green eyes, a rose-colored horizontal facial mark, the image of the old Thirnth Spada flooded back into their minds. Neliel tu Odelschwank, kind and gentle, an espada whose temperament never matched the rest, who hated slaughter. "Neliel is alive?" murmured more than one voice. No one reacted harder than Neutra. The memory of that day, his ambush, cutting Nell's mask from behind, returned like a wound, his face darkened with a long-buried shame. As a man who'd always bragged about being the strongest, he'd attacked a female espada from behind. Only Sailaporo had known the details of their scheme. They had forced the masks from Nell's two subordinates, lured her into a trap, and struck. Nelson's fall had cleared the way for subsequent shifts in power, Haribal's rise among them. And though Neutra had tried to bury it, the memory still stung. Sailaporo's own face was tight, brow twitching despite his restraint. The past was an ugly thing for them both. Even Aizen's eyes flickered with interest. He hadn't expected Nell to survive, much less to be grieving for Ichigo on camera. Before anyone could process more, a blur of movement sliced across the feed. Sonido! Grimjo flashed into view, and with him another figure, tall, graceful. His voice barked an order that made everyone blink. "Woman, heal her!" Grimjo demanded. "Make Ichigo come back to life right now. Do it as fast as you can." He dropped casually onto a broken rock, staring down at Ichigo's body with cold eyes. The command, "Live on the broadcast," left the captains aghast. "Wait, this plot just keeps twisting," someone exclaimed. The Seirete officers gaped. Grimjo had fought alongside Urahara Kisuke in the Thousand-Year Blood War. Why would an Arrancar, an enemy who just killed Ichigo, now order that same enemy healed? And with that massive chest wound, could Ichigo possibly be brought back? Doubt crowded their faces. The captains were growing alarmed and uneasy. Then Orihime Inoue stepped forward. She had answered Grimjo's order. She activated Soten Kishin and began to concentrate on Ichigo's shattered body. Seconds later, every expression in the Gote 13 and among millions of live viewers changed from disbelief to open astonishment. "How is that possible?" people cried. "He was clearly dead. How can he be resurrected like that? This woman, she's a cheat too." Chapter 206, Talking about Fairness with Someone Who Cheats. "How is that possible?" The murmurs swelled into a chorus. "Look, Ichigo's wound, it's closing. The hole in his chest is healing." They stared at the screen in stunned silence. Kurosaki Ichigo's body, supposedly dead, lay within a glowing barrier, being tended by Soten Kishin. The giant, gaping wound in his chest pulsed with dark red reiatsu that seemed to rewind time itself, a swirling vortex drawing power from the surrounding air. Is that real? The reiatsu that had dissipated with death was flowing back into Ichigo's spirit body. Was time being reversed? A silence that had long lain over the soul society snapped like a stretched string. Rank and title meant nothing. Strength and allegiance were irrelevant. Every viewer who watched the healing unfold wore the same expression: absolute, horrified disbelief. For a moment, it seemed as if countless statues had frozen in front of every transparent monitor. No one could tear their eyes away. Captain Retsu Unohana, with your medical knowledge, can you explain what's happening? Kyoraku Shunsui asked, his voice tight with agitation. How did she save Ichigo? It wasn't just him. Every Gotei 13 captain present, indeed even the captain commander, was shaken. By all accounts, Ichigo's body had gone cold. There were no fluctuations of spiritual power, nothing to indicate life. Under those circumstances, death could only be undone by time travel or something like the Hogyoku's power, unless you were Aizen. Otherwise, fate could not be overturned. On the screen, however, Orihime Inoue had simply placed her hands on the barrier and said plainly, "I reject." Then, the impossible happened. The process began. The dissipated reiatsu reconverged. The blood hole in Ichigo's chest visibly knit itself back together. It shattered every frame of reference the captains had. Even the master healer of the Gotei 13 looked shaken. Retsu Unohana frowned deeply and answered quietly, solemnly, "I'm sorry. With my knowledge, I cannot comprehend this technique." "My first impression," she continued, "was that this has something to do with space and time, some ability to pull the present back toward the past. But," she added, "with the girl's level of spiritual power, she couldn't possibly sustain a prolonged temporal reversal. Not even I could." Her words landed like thunder, leaving the captains dumbstruck. "So what are you saying?" someone demanded. After a beat, Unohana offered a measured, high appraisal. "Soten Kishun. It involves time and space and healing, and yet it goes far beyond anything I have ever known as healing arts. It's an ability infinitely more advanced than mere medical technique." Even Unohana, the foremost expert in healing within the Gotei 13, who had saved countless lives across centuries, admitted that Orihime's power was in a different realm. Far away in Las Noches, Aizen Sato was watching from his throne. He shifted, a rare gleam of surprise and excitement widening his eyes. "Rejecting," he murmured to himself. "As long as something is inside that barrier, all negative effects inflicted on it, wounds, severed limbs, lost vitality, can be nullified by rejecting them." His breathing paused for the briefest moment. Without a hint of melodrama, his voice praised the ability even higher than Unohana had. "This woman's power infringes upon the realm of God," he said quietly. "Without a doubt, it belongs among the very top tier." Aizen's words rang through the silent hall like a bell. The Arankar trembled as if struck by lightning. Infringes upon the realm of God? The Arankar who had taken part in the invasion were stunned. Yami and Okiura listened with interest. Both had been occupied nearer the center of Karakura and had clashed with Soul Reapers. Grimjo Jagerjakas, however, felt the realization like a physical blow. He remembered the high school grounds, remembered wounding Ishin and nearly capturing Ichigo. More importantly, he remembered the woman who had stood less than 3 meters from him. If he had known she was that powerful, he thought angrily, he would have taken her back to Hueco Mundo, no matter what. He regretted his past self's inaction and grew furious watching the footage of his future self. "Grimjow," he barked inwardly at the recorded version of himself. "What were you thinking? Ichigo was finally dead. You didn't even finish him. What made you try to revive him?" The answer his future self gave in the footage was an insult: to pursue a fair and just battle. Fairness, he scorned silently. Were they serious, preaching about fairness after all the cheating? He wanted to tear that future self apart. Meanwhile, the healing finished faster than anyone expected. With the last wisp of black reiatsu drawn back into his chest, the wound sealed completely. Ichigo's eyes opened. As he stared at the familiar but battered figures around him, he was just beginning to form words and in the confusion glanced toward Grimjo. Suddenly, Ulquiorra sped forward in a blur. "Sonido," he called, vanishing into position in an instant. Standing with one hand in his pocket, his voice emotionless and cold as ice, he fixed Grimjo with his emerald stare. "What are you doing?" Ulquiorra asked. "You purposely healed an enemy you defeated. What are your intentions?" The question cut through the air in the replay like a blade. Ulquiorra's gaze was so frigid that anyone who met it felt their soul shiver. "Touch!" Grimjo's reaction was a single clipped sound as he met the accusation.